All right, Shalom, giving all praises, honor, and glory to our power, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem, Rachak, double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the whole elect of the tabernacles of David, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, wherever you may be, Shalom, Yeshua, Shalom. All right, so this is nothing new. What this video in particular is new. I think it was came out just like an hour ago. From a guy I picked up on him a little while back. He brings out some pretty good information here and there. All right, I don't really know his name, but it's called Geopolitical Economy. All right, well, you can go and listen to this. So, and I'm not very geopolitical. I know what I know, what I don't know. I'm not going to try to pretend like I know. And for that matter, I'm going to really mostly, allow you to listen in. All right, and I'll chime in as necessary. Okay. But we're going to play this video, and it's 32 minutes long. As you see, I was listening to some of it. Okay. You just made another stop here. So, and so I don't really know the rest of the video, but yeah, we're gonna play this video. He's speaking on this economical situation, the tariffs, and all those things of that nature. So you just listen up.
U.S. President Donald Trump imposed high tariffs on countries all around the world, essentially declaring a global trade war on the 2nd of April, which he dubbed Liberation Day. Then, just a few days later, Trump paused the tariffs that he imposed on most countries around the world, imposing a blanket tariff of 10% on all countries. But then he focused specifically on China, hitting China with tariffs of 145%. This would have been catastrophic for the U.S. economy, given that the United States imports more goods from China than from any other country. And almost immediately after Trump declared what was essentially a nuclear...
And before he did that, you didn't think he knew that? You didn't think he understood that?
...trade war against China, he backtracked. He took a major step back, and essentially he acknowledged defeat in the trade war that he initiated. How so? Trump announced exemptions for Chinese exports of smartphones, computers, and other electronics.
Hey, put this in your ear. I know how you hate going to my parents' house because they're...
To the U.S. This came after U.S. big tech corporations like Apple told the U.S. government they needed exceptions because without China, which plays a key role in global supply chains, they simply cannot produce the electronics goods that the 21st century U.S. economy relies on. So in the case of Apple, 80% of iPhones sold in the United States are made in China. So this exemption carried out by Trump is, as the BBC put it, quote, a significant trade war retreat. End quote. I would go a step further and say that this is an acknowledgement indirectly by the White House that Trump's trade war against China failed. Because if you look at China...
No, I didn't fail. All right. It's going, as according to plan, man. Okay. And, this is something we mention often, man, when you deal with Revelation 13, 16, 17, 18, all right? You have different, companies who are dabbling with, this technology because they're all trying to, work on it, perfect it, and it's all for the plans of the globalist elite, right? All right, which are the banking families, okay? So we understand that, all right? So, yeah, that's part of the plan that has to keep rolling. So everything is going, according to plan, man. There's nothing to miss here, all right? If it seems a miss, it's not a miss, all right? Everything's going according, because ultimately it's what? It's about the controlled demolition of the economic welfare of America, right? It's about bringing this place down to its knees so they can come and issue in the digital banks, all right, the digital CHIPs and all those different things, all right, and turn this thing into a digital society, okay? So everything is going according to plan, man. Nothing is off here.
Trade with the U.S., you can see very clearly that China's largest exports to the U.S. are cell phones, computers, electric batteries, and other electronics. They make up over a third, around 40% of China's exports to the U.S. And Trump just put exemptions on these goods, implicitly admitting that the U.S. is much more dependent on China than China is on the U.S. And this also raises a huge question because the Trump administration claims that it wants to use these tariffs to reindustrialize the U.S. But by exempting these crucial electronics goods, we have to ask, what products does the U.S. plan on manufacturing locally exactly? Because if you look at China's other exports to the U.S., it includes things like toys, textiles, plastic products, Tupperware. So does Trump's plan to reindustrialize the U.S. mean that millions of Americans are going to go work in factories making plastic products and t-shirts and tennis shoes? Is that his grand vision for the reindustrialization of the U.S. while China continues to make all of these advanced electronics, which now have exemptions? I think what this shows is that the Trump administration knows it's not actually going to reindustrialize the United States. This is just rhetoric that Trump has used to try to win support. But at the end of the day, he's using tariffs as a political tool, not to reindustrialize the U.S., but one, to cut taxes on the rich and corporations and to replace the loss of revenue with tariffs, which are taxes. Trump falsely claims that other countries pay for tariffs. It's not true. It's U.S. importers that pay for tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and they are a very regressive form of taxation because it is the majority of poor and working people in the United States, not the rich, who will bear the cost of those tariffs. So Trump is using tariffs to cut taxes on the rich and increase taxes on the poor and the working class. And then the other major reason for Trump's tariffs is to pressure other countries to pay tribute to the United States. This strategy was...
See, what can't let that go over here. Pay tribute, all right? Those that are in power always do what? They tax others. They want them to what? Pay tribute, all right? They want them to be subject to them, okay? They want them to be loyal to them, all right? Um, I was thinking of Revelation chapter 17, all right? Where it speaks about them, which that's more so going to that scripture I'm thinking of is going to the destruction of America, all right? But it says they gave their power to the beast, all right? Until the will of the Lord be fulfilled, just roughly paraphrasing, okay? But yeah, going back to my point though, all right, it wants them to pay tributary, right? When you go into our history, we were tributary under nations, all right? That's why you had, seasons, or what's it called? The the census, all right? The census, all right? Seeing who lives where and how many are in your household, all right? Really, it's not even about where you live, but I mean, it's more so how many people are in your household so we can know the proper amount to tax you, okay? Even it speaks about Joseph and Mary going to be taxed with baby Yahusha, all right? I believe that's like around Luke 2 or 3, okay? Going to be taxed, man. So it's all so those that are in power, who has the power to see the earth, which are the Edomites, which is being pretty much projected from America, okay, by the banking families. They want to bring back that boldness of the eagle into this earth, okay, because the way they see it, if Trump's the puppet, but we're going to generate from the eyes of Trump, all right. We're not being taken as serious as we used to be, okay? We're not as feared as we used to be, and these people are getting advantage of us, even our allies, man, okay? So let's play some more of this video.
Outlined by Trump's top economic advisor, Stephen Myron, who said that Trump wants to use tariffs to force countries to help the U.S. pay for the global dollar system that benefits the U.S. and the constellation of hundreds of foreign military bases that the U.S. has around the world. Now, in my reports here at Geopolitical Economy Report, I have constantly emphasized that Trump's tariffs are going to fail to reindustrialize the U.S. because the Trump administration does not have an actual industrial policy. Every industrialized country has relied on government planning, targeting certain sectors and saying we're going to develop these industries, move up the value chain. The government's going to invest in education and worker training and research and infrastructure and providing cheap loans and subsidies and other incentives to these manufacturing companies. Trump is not doing any of that. He's simply relying on tariffs. And this is why immediately after the U.S. president announced these tariffs on countries all around the world on so-called Liberation Day, I warned that this strategy was going to fail, but I didn't think that it would fail in 1 week. I think I underestimated just how bad this policy was and how poorly thought out everything was. There was basically no planning whatsoever. It was pure chaos. And just a few days later, the Trump administration basically admitted defeat. Now, Trump has tried to save face publicly for PR reasons, and on his website, which is a copy of Twitter, he claimed that there was no tariff exception announced for Chinese goods. But then in the next line, he did note that there actually was an exception for these products because Trump put 145% tariffs on all goods for China. But what he's announcing is that now Chinese electronics goods like smartphones and computers and chips are only tariffed at a rate of 20%, not 145%. So there was an exception, But while Trump claims that the media misreported his executive order, he called them the fake news, he said there were no exceptions announced. But if you read the executive order that was signed by Trump and posted by the White House, it's available to the entire world to see, it says very clearly in the title, exceptions. These are exceptions. Now, Trump claims they're not exceptions, but they are exceptions. The text of the executive order says very clearly that Trump declared a so-called national emergency in response to large and persistent U.S. goods trade deficits. By the way, keep in mind they say goods trade deficits because as much as Trump complains about the U.S. deficit, the U.S. actually has a trade surplus in services with the rest of the world. The U.S. exports more services than it imports. What it does have is a massive...
Gotta pause right there because we talk about this all the time. All right, hold on. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get back to this video, but I gotta get it. As a matter of fact, let me pull up these because I've been trying to use this more. Let me pull up the GNT. Let's go over here real quick, okay? Because we talk about this all the time. How do I use this one? I'm not really used to using this one. Okay, no. Everything's happening. Bear with me. I think it's here. Okay, so let's go and punch up. Hold on. Let me get this out the way. Okay, so let's punch up Revelation chapter 18. Hopefully it comes up, or will. Okay, yep. Let's see if we can find the GNT. Here it is. GNT with the pocket. We don't need the pocket right now because we're not going into that. So we just get the GNT. So Revelation chapter 18. Okay. Let's just read. I'm not sure exactly what I want from here. Okay. I'm not sure where I'm going to stop, but let's just read. So it says, after this, I saw another angel coming down out of heaven. He had a great authority, and his splendor brightened the whole earth. He cried out in a loud voice, "She has fallen, great Babylon has fallen. She is now haunted by demons and unclean spirits." As a matter of fact, I do know exactly what I want. It's further down. So it says, as a matter of fact, let's get that. Let's try to stay on point more so. Here we go. Verse 10. Verse 9. So it says, the kings of the earth who took part in her immorality and lust will cry and weep over the city when they see the smoke from the flames that consume her. They stand a long way off because they are afraid of sharing in her suffering. They say, how terrible, how awful, this great and mighty city Babylon. In just 1 hour you have been punished. The merchants of the earth also cry and mourn for her because no one buys their goods any longer. It's exactly what he just said, which is something we also mention often, man, that America, because it's the fact, that America has more import of goods from other countries than it does have export, all right? And the majority of the things you will always see is made in China. You will see made in other places, but there's a great number of items that you will always look and see. You know, it says made in China. You will see that more often than any other place. You see made in Japan. You might see made in Taiwan. You might see made here, there, but you will always see made in China. Okay. So it says, and that's what I mentioned before. You don't think that before he did the tariff thing, all right, honing in on China, you didn't think before he did that he knew how much they imported from China. Okay. America has more import of goods than it has export, and a lot of that comes from China. It says, no one buys their gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, their goods of linen, purple cloth, silk, and scarlet cloth, all kinds of rare woods, and all kinds of objects made of ivory and of expensive wood, of bronze, iron, and marble. And we know the ivory comes from, the elephant tusk and stuff like that. Not unless Esau, not knowing, you never know. He done, found a manufacturer, fabricated a synthetic, ivory. Okay, might not even be real ivory. I'm just, let's keep going. No one buys their gold. You just can't put it past Esau, man. He's always doing stuff. Okay. No one buys it. Speaking of gold, right? The gold that you might buy, maybe you buy it online or in the shop, more likely it's not real, man. Okay. And if it is real, then, hey, yippee. All right. But we know there's a lot of fake gold being sold out here. All right. It says, no one buys their gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, their goods of linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of rare woods, and all kinds of objects made of ivory and expensive wood, of bronze, iron, and marble, and cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine and oil, flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, slaves, and even human lives, because we know about, those secret businesses, all right? So it says, the merchants say to her, all the good things you long to own have disappeared, and all your wealth and glamour are gone, and you will never find them again. The merchants who became rich from doing business in that city, all right, which includes China, which is the talking point of this video, America versus China, right? It says will stand a long way off because they are afraid of sharing in our suffering. They will cry and mourn. Okay, which China has a certain judgment coming upon, and you can read about that in Second Ezra, the bottom of chapter 15. All right, well, it speaks about woe unto you, Asia. Okay, because they're the one nation that has closely fashioned itself after America. Okay, after America, excuse me. Okay, it says and I know I mention this all the time, but you get some of these so-called Asian girls, and a lot of them they talk like the Edomite chicks do. All right, and if you didn't actually see their face, just heard the voice, you might have thought it was an Edomite, and you turn like, oh shit, okay. Well, yeah, Moab, right? So it says it says the merchants who became rich from doing business in that city will stand a long way off because they are afraid of sharing in her suffering. They will cry and mourn and say, how terrible, how awful for the great city. She used to dress herself in linen, purple, and scarlet and cover herself with gold ornaments, precious stones, and pearls. And in 1 hour, she has lost all this wealth, all the ship's captains and passengers, the sailors, and all others who earned their living on the sea stood a long way off and cried out as they saw the smoke from the flames that consumed her. There never has been another city like this great city. They threw dust on their heads. They cried and mourned, saying, how terrible, how awful for the great city. She is the city where all who have ships sailing the seas became rich on her wealth. She's the cash cow. America's the cash cow. Okay? We're talking about it here in the scriptures. Excuse me. And we're talking about it in that video right here. She is the city where all who have ships sailing the seas became rich on her wealth, and in 1 hour she has lost everything. Okay? But this is for us. Be glad, heaven, because of her destruction. Be glad, the Most High's people and the apostles and prophets, for the Most High has condemned her for what she did to you. Ooh. So you can find that video again. Nope. All right, so bear with me. All right, here we go.
Trade surplus in services with the rest of the world. The U.S. exports more services than it imports. What it does have is a massive trade deficit in goods. It imports many more goods than it exports. But the point is that Trump issued an executive order declaring this trade deficit to be a, quote, unusual and extraordinary threat, end quote, which is language used by the U.S. president so they can carry out executive action without approval of Congress. And then in this executive order, the new one, he says that certain goods are not subject to the tariff rates that were announced in the other executive order. And as an example of products that have exceptions, he included semiconductors, and he specifically named the People's Republic of China. And then later, the executive order had a list with many different numbers of products listed under U.S. tariff law that says that these products are...
I'm Shannon Krief, and I've been helping people heal with herbs for 20 years. Today, I want to show you my...
Says that I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house no matter what condition it's in. If says that these products are exempted. And if you go to the official website of the U.S. government's harmonized tariff schedule, as it's known, and you look up the numbers that were listed in this Trump executive order, you can see it includes products like smartphones and computers and semiconductors. So in other words, Trump's trade war on China almost immediately failed in the most important area, which is electronics. Trump says he wants to make all of these electronics at home. He wants to build factories to make smartphones and computers and semiconductors in the United States. But then he immediately issued exceptions for these products made in China because he knows that U.S. companies cannot make those products in the U.S. at a reasonable price. It would take many years, if not decades, to develop all of the infrastructure and build the factories and train the workers needed to actually create those products in the U.S., and they would be significantly more expensive. And honestly, this whole situation is so embarrassing and frankly hilarious because Trump has constantly been making these comments complaining that China's president Xi Jinping doesn't want to call him. And he's like, I just want to talk to Xi. Will you please call me President Xi? I really want to talk to you. And China says no. China is standing up for itself and saying, we will talk to you when you stop waging trade war against us, when you lift these unilateral aggressive tariffs, which Trump falsely claimed were reciprocal. They were not reciprocal. They were unilateral. And many officials in Trump...
And yeah, that's just causing more tension, all right? In the scriptures speak about, is that in Daniel 7, where it says that his look was more stout than his fellow? I don't think that's Daniel 7. That's Daniel 7. But anyways, the scriptures say, his look was more stout than his fellows, all right? I believe it might be. But yeah, them, projecting themselves to the world like they're doing. All right, it's all leading up to, the fulfillment of prophecy, man. Okay, a great tension in the earth. You got World War III. Okay, you got eventually where the Allies are going to turn against America. All these things are leading somewhere, but we know that Micro C hip has to come first, man. Okay, and as you see, there was exemptions on certain things. All right, which those C hips fall kind of under that category, man. All right.
Administration claimed that the U.S. has so much leverage over China. China has no cards. China is going to be begging the U.S.
And either China comes to the table with Donald Trump or they don't. But let's be clear, we are their biggest client by far, by far, by far. The American consumer buys everything from China. They can't afford to be without us.
But it's actually Trump who's begging China's president to return his phone calls. Meanwhile, President Xi has been visiting Southeast Asia, boosting China's relations with Vietnam and other countries in the region, which is crucial because the United States has been militarizing Southeast Asia. The U.S. military now has at least 9 bases in the Philippines, and Washington has been trying to divide Vietnam and China. And yet now the Trump administration is pushing Vietnam and China closer together. When President Xi visited Vietnam, China and Vietnam signed 45 agreements, including on issues like expanding rail lines to connect the countries and on supply chains and trade. So while Trump has been claiming that he's going to use all of the leverage that the U.S. supposedly has over China to force Beijing to make a deal, meanwhile, China and Vietnam have actually been making deals, and Trump is complaining about their lovely meeting, as he put it, and he complained that China and Vietnam are discussing, quote, how to screw the United States of America, end quote. So all of this is bolstering a point that I have constantly repeated here in my reports, which is that the United States is actually much more dependent on China than China is on the U.S. And this was detailed in a great report in the Financial Times titled Trade, Tech, and Treasuries, China Holds Cards in U.S. Tariff Standoff. I want to go through some of the...
And not to mention, China is part of the BRICS nations, all right? Which at the end of the day, you still have the American dollar, the reserve currency, okay? And that's going to be a major pivotal point, all right? Because they're not going to allow any other currency to just take over, all right? The digital system is going to come in before they allow another nation's currency to be their reserve currency, man. Okay?
In points of this report. They noted that, quote, China can replace its imports from the U.S. more easily than the other way around. U.S. goods exports to China are heavily focused on agriculture, such as soybeans, cotton, beef, and poultry, and so are low value added. Many U.S. imports from China, electronics, machinery, and some processed minerals, are the opposite, end quote. And the FT produced this chart that shows that many of China's exports to the U.S. are high value added goods, technologies like semiconductors and computers and cell phones, whereas the top exports that the U.S. sends to China are things like petroleum, oil, gas, food products. China can easily replace many of the things that it imports from the U.S. Many countries produce oil and gas. Other countries produce agricultural commodities like soybeans. For instance, China is now importing more and more soybeans from Brazil. Brazil is, of course, a founding member of BRICS and an ally of China. So Trump administration officials like the billionaire Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent have constantly claimed that supposedly China is so dependent on the U.S. But in reality, China can replace its imports from the U.S. for the most part. Now, that said, it is true that there are still a few products that China imports from the U.S. that are hard to replace. As the Financial Times noted, the pain of a trade war will still be felt in China because it imports some products like U.S. aircraft parts, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. However, in all 3 of these industries, China has been making very rapid progress in developing its own aircrafts, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors. Let's start by talking about civilian planes. Now, the global airliner industry is a duopoly. It's dominated by 2 Western corporations, the US corporation Boeing and the European corporation Airbus. However, in 2023, China took on this duopoly by developing its own domestic airliner. It is true that China relies on importing parts for its own domestically produced airliner from other countries. So it's not a totally indigenous technology, but China is rapidly making progress to create an entire supply chain locally to create its own airliners. And in fact, in response to Trump's very aggressive trade war, China ordered its domestic airline companies to suspend deliveries of jets from Boeing. So this is a message from China to the US that we're no longer going to do business with this, by the way, horrible US company, Boeing, whose planes are constantly failing. The company has been destroying itself in recent years. Boeing was previously run by engineers, but the company was taken over by a bunch of MBA grads, these financial speculators with little to no experience in manufacturing planes. And instead of investing in security and a high quality product, they made their priority maximizing their stock prices in order to increase the bonuses for their corporate executives. And they've treated the company like a financial firm. And as Boeing has been financialized, they have been laying off skilled unionized workers and hiring contractors who are not unionized and who are not well trained. And they've been cutting corners and refusing to invest in good security. And the result is Boeing around the world is losing more and more market share to its main European competitor, Airbus, and now China is also entering the stage as a serious competitor, and Trump's tariffs are going to only accelerate China's process of developing its own domestic civilian jet airliner industry. And this is so similar to what happened with semiconductors. And this is bipartisan, it's not just Trump. So in his first administration in 2018, Trump started the U.S. trade war on China. However, when the Democrat Biden came in 2021, he continued his Republican predecessor's trade war. And the Biden administration announced export restrictions on China, trying to block China from getting access to advanced technologies and especially cutting-edge chips. Biden's Commerce Secretary, Gina Raimondo, said that the U.S. government would do anything it takes to stop China from getting access to advanced technologies. And she said Washington's goal was to, quote, slow down China's rate of innovation, end quote, in order to protect big tech monopolies in Silicon Valley. And now Trump is in his second term as president, and the U.S. government has ordered NVIDIA to further tighten its restrictions on China. Previously, NVIDIA was allowed to export the H20 chip to China, which could be used for AI research. And now the Trump administration has ordered NVIDIA to also halt the exports of that chip to China. This strategy, in which the U.S. government is trying to sabotage China's chip industry to try to prevent it from developing AI, has been referred to as a chip war. And yet this chip war, like Trump's tariffs, has actually been backfiring on the United States. And China has been developing its own domestic chip industry. And China has become the world leader in the production of what are known as legacy chips, which are not the most advanced chips, but most electronics products that average people use who aren't super rich, most computers, most cell phones, they don't have the most advanced chips. You don't need the most advanced chips. So China has been dominating the global industry for the majority of chips. Biden's Commerce Secretary Raimondo, who's the one who admitted that the U.S. wants to try to prevent China from developing technologically, she warned that in a few years, China could produce 60% of all new legacy chips coming to the market in the world. That might have been a bit of an exaggeration, but Fortune magazine estimated that by 2027, mainland China will be responsible for creating 33% of legacy chips in the entire world, 1/3. And China has been making enormous progress very quickly. Nature, which is the leading scientific journal, published a scientific article in 2025 noting that China's research on next-generation computer chips is double the output of the United States. They wrote that, quote, China is now producing most of the basic research that could underpin future computing hardware, end quote. And Chinese companies are catching up to NVIDIA very quickly. Huawei, which was sanctioned by the US government during Trump's first trade war. By the way, Huawei is owned by its workers, a fun fact. And also the Chinese Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, SMIC, which is partially state-owned. They have been working together to develop new advanced chips for AI research. And despite the U.S. government's export restrictions and chip war against China, the country has already made enormous progress in artificial intelligence. Of course, the Chinese company DeepSeek surprised the entire world in early 2025 by releasing a new AI model that was open source. It was just as good as the models developed by the U.S. huge corporation OpenAI, which is 49% owned by the monopoly Microsoft. And yet, despite the hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by U.S. big tech corporations in Silicon Valley, these small Chinese companies have already caught up in AI models that are just as good, that cost a fraction of the price to use. They use a tiny fraction of the energy, and they've released their models open source for anyone in the world to use. So all of this shows how the U.S. has been failing in its trade war against China, its economic war against China, and its tech war. And Bloomberg published an important report in 2024 that admits that the U.S. government's attempt to try to stop China from developing technologically is failing. Bloomberg analyzed the goals that were outlined in Made in China 2025, which was an ambitious government plan announced in China in 2015, because, of course, China has a socialist government that engages in planning of parts of the economy, especially in high-tech sectors. And then the government used...
And at the end of the day, man, because, once America is destroyed, all right, these other countries think that they're going to come into power, man. Like one of them, and that's why I mention it so often, man. You got the BRICS coalition. You got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, all right, and whoever else joins as the plus nations. But once America is destroyed, that's going to be done away with, because Russia, who was the backbone, to these other nations, they're going to think like, yeah, we're the new big bad in the earth. But then look at what China's doing, all right? China's going to think the same thing. No, we're the big bad in the earth, okay? Then you're going to have India and South Africa saying, well, what makes you think that we're not, capable of leading and, or ruling, or whatever the case may be, what do you want to call it, all right? So then you got Saudi Arabia, all these other places, man, all right? And they're going to be broken up, okay? So then you also have whoever was, so-called ally to, but I guess at that point, they're not allies anyways because they played a part in destroying America. But the point is, everybody's going to fight one against another to take power in the earth, and it's not going to happen, man. Yahushua is going to come, okay? He's going to deliver up the elect, and he's going to establish, he's going to wage that righteous war and establish the kingdom of heaven. And all those nations are going to get taken down because it talks about this in 2 Ezra chapter 13. They were sore afraid, but yet there's fight. They had to stop fighting everyone the battle that they were fighting, because if America's destroyed, why are they still fighting? Because they're fighting against one another all over again. But this time it's because they want the power seat. They want that seat that America was recently sitting in. Okay, so they're going to turn on one another, right? Russia going to be fighting against China, all right, and so on and so forth. And Yahushua is going to come and put a stop to all of that. They're going to have to join forces once again, right? This time it's everybody, all right? Even the allies that turn against America, as well as those, BRICS nations and all those other countries, they're going to have to turn all together to themselves, fight against Yahushua. They're going to be destroyed, man, okay? But what we're leading into is a collapse of this society, man, okay? And we're moving into, Lord willing, is just, he keeps, because the Lord is working fast, man, and he just keep, moving and working, all right, to collapse of the society. And ultimately, because before all these things go fall through, all right, we have to have that C-hip that's established, man. It's so close, man. All right, but we just got to keep waiting, man, because the Lord, the scriptures say that the visions are yet for an appointed time. All right, now I want to get into more of this. The reason why I stopped it there. All right, do a little, a final, say real quick, because I know my battery's dying. Got like 5 or 6%, and I want to really finish this video. But it's not long, man. Okay, so you can go listen to it yourself. Once again, this is from Geopolitical Economy Report. All right. As you see, it was only put up an hour ago, but I wanted to get into that just a little bit, especially dealing with the portion there where he mentioned the export and import of goods, man, because we speak about this all the time, because that's in line with not saying he was being prophetic or anything. He doesn't have any clue about those things, but we know for a fact we can go to the book of Revelation chapter 18 and bring those same talking points out and show you that it's scriptural and prophetic. Okay. But we're moving. We're watching the downfall of a nation, man. Okay, like they make these slave movies, right? Birth of a Nation. Well, which name the birth of this nation, but it's actually the downfall. It's the opposite. Okay, because I guess if you want to put it that way, the birth of this nation is for them to go into 1,000 years of captivity, man. Okay, that's going to be the new birth of their nation. All right. So they make the movies about us, but all those things are about to turn back upon them. All right, like the scripture saying, Deuteronomy. I want to say it's is that 30:7. All right, the Lord's going to put all these curses on our enemies. Just paraphrasing. So we're moving into that time, man. All right, Jacob's trouble. All right, the micro-C have been established, martial law, chaos, war all over it, including on the states and so on and so forth, man. And that's why it's an exciting time to be in. Okay, it's an exciting time to be alive. All right, not a sad time, because hey, better is the end of a thing than the beginning of it, and we're at the end of this thing here, which is called our captivity. So we're gonna leave it at that. Like I said, I want to go into more of this video, but I'm gonna have to sit myself down somewhere, because I'm gonna have to charge my device up. So Lord, will you edify? Shalom.